Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Path 11 podcast today. I am excited to bring back a guest that I had on actually almost over 100 episodes ago, maybe like 150 episodes ago. I have David Roberts here with me, and we have another special guest with him, Patty Furino. But David and I spoke, a couple of years ago. It was episode 111. Lovely number. And it is a lovely number. And he really talked about grieving the sudden death of a loved one. And you will find out today, if you haven't listened to that podcast, that his daughter did pass. She died of cancer on March 1st of 2003 at the age of 18. He is a retired addiction professional and an adjunct professor in the psychology and psychology child life departments at Utica College, and he's also been a keynote speaker and workshop presenter at national and regional grief conferences. We also have Reverend Patty Furino, and now they kind of co-wrote this book together that we're going to be talking about today. And Patty chose to walk a sacred path, obtaining wisdom from a variety of spiritual practices and philosophies. After completing a 2-year program at the New Seminary in New York City, she was an ordained interfaith minister, and she was inspired to embrace other spiritual paths. Never instead of, always in addition to, by the founder, Rabbi Joseph Gelberman. Pretty sure I got that right. So she made a vow to learn to walk through life like the masters, helping people through challenging times, offering hope and following the motto of St. Francis, make me an instrument of peace. So Patty and Dave got together. I think it was back in 2010. They're going to tell you the story of how they met. It's pretty fascinating. And then they decided to come together to write this book. And Dave, would you like to give us the title of the book, as I'll bring you on first?
Yes, I'm going to even show it if that's okay. It's When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, how the woman on the corner of Hunter and Whittier permanently transformed one academic's worldview. And here it is. That's the cover.
Beautiful. Yeah. So for those of you who are listening, that's great. But for those of you who love watching the video podcast, just want to remind you, you can watch them on path11tv.com for free. So you can actually see the visuals of what my guests present. So Dave, okay. So you had a pretty profound experience at this conference where you had come into contact with Patty. So why don't you kind of give us a little recap of the death of your daughter for those people who didn't listen to episode 111. And then let's kind of bring us moving forward to the conference and then you meeting Patty, and then we'll kind of start from there.
Okay. First of all, April, it's great to be back on the show, and I with you today. And I didn't realize it was episode 111, but that is a very profound and a very significant number in the world of spirituality. So I was happy to be episode 111, but essentially about 1 week after I received my master's degree in social work from the University of Albany, SUNY Albany, my daughter Jeannine was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. It was a velar rhabdomyosarcoma, which was a connective muscle tissue cancer, which had originated after she had injured her foot several months earlier. And we weren't obviously expecting cancer. We thought, she did some traditional conservative treatments for her foot, foot elevation, just rest, but nothing worked to cut further ahead in May. And the other part of the story is that she had given birth to my first grandchild and her granddaughter, whose name is Brianna. And shortly after Brianna was born, they did an MRI of her foot. It was discovered to be the MRI that was suggestive for cancer. A biopsy confirmed that. And on May 26th, and I remember these dates as if they happened yesterday, she was officially diagnosed. We went to Dana-Farber Institute in Boston because they are one of the few cancer institutes in the country that deal with research and treatment of pediatric sarcomas. They told us basically that her cancer was incurable. She had a stage 4 tumor. It fully metastasized. And they said, short of a miracle, she was going to die. And that was the message that we got. She did chemotherapy for 6 months. They put her cancer in 80% remission. But as you know, with cancer, it's either 100% or nothing. Her cancer, again, remetastasized, and she eventually died at home or transitioned into a new existence, as I like to refer to it now, on March 1st at 12:30 in the morning with hospice, with hospice services. And it just set me on a course of a journey I never thought, a path that I never thought I'd be embracing. So that is the short version.
Right. And so after her passing, you were doing, like you said in the book, what most grieving parents do, right? They're reading books, they're going to conferences, they're trying to, probably find their own spiritual beliefs, doing their own healing. And what was the name of the conference again? I didn't write that down, but
it was Beyond Words.
Beyond Words, right?
Yeah, Beyond Words. It was in 2010 in September. And I was part of the committee to organize that. And I think, as you mentioned, I was walking the path of a bereaved father pretty well, and probably all too well. I was doing, workshops in honor of my daughter. I was constantly making sure she would be remembered. Any teaching activities I did were in honor, were obviously inspired by my daughter. I mean, I was walking that path very well for 7 years. I was doing conferences, everything. But and this is kind of where Patty comes in initially. I had asked initially how we had met. She had called me, and I think it was August 25th. She had called me, as I recall. She was interested in registering for the Beyond Words conference. And as we look back on this was, I think, our first introduction to spirit intervening. She could not, for whatever reason, register for the workshop. Her link just wasn't working. So she called me, and we started talking. And immediately, again, because of my perspective as a bereaved parent at that time, I had asked very gently, and she had lost a child. She told me she hadn't, but she also told me about her experiences with many parents who had lost children as her in a role as volunteer coordinator for the Angel of Hope in Long Island. And I told her about Jeannine. For 45 minutes, we shared stories. We shared tears. And she said, "When I see you in September, I want to give you a hug." So I saw her briefly at the last workshop that I was kind of monitoring. I gave her that big bear hug, and she whispers in my ear. She goes, "I think I saw a rainbow. I saw a rainbow, and I think it was a sign from your daughter." And at that point, I was just so tired, April, and I had begun to entertain the possibility of signs. I had acknowledged it, but I never really knew the significance of signs, particularly as it can relate to fostering continuing bonds with our loved ones and everlasting relationships. I'm thinking, yeah, great, another sign. And that's what was going through my head because I was just tired. Mm-hmm. And then she said, if you ever get to Long Island, I want to show you my Long Island. Okay. I'm going to jump the day after the conference I was taking, and we talk about this in the book, I was taking 3 of our key conference presenters up to Old Forge in the Adirondacks to see the change of seasons, and they just have a nice drive. And I'm listening to this very intense spiritual conversation in the back of the car and thinking to myself, and I said this spontaneously, I want to be where they are. So I stated my intent. It had to be September 11th, I think it was the day after that conference, to the universe that I wanted something more. I just wanted to initially engage in a spiritual conversation or have a greater sense of how spirituality can work in my life so that I could come to some further clarity about my daughter's death. And so then on my BlackBerry phone, there was this announcement called Embracing the Power of Change, which was by a colleague, Ron Villano, whose show I had appeared on a few times. And I'm thinking to myself, do I go or don't I go? So I finally called Pat, And I said, I'm thinking of coming out. Can you tell me about any good hotels that are out there? She goes, yeah, you can stay with me and my husband, Marco. And she's laughing because she's laughing about this because I must have asked her over 100 times, is your husband going to mind that a strange man is staying in your house? She goes, no, Marco's easygoing. And I had this picture of just some really jealous guy who was bigger than me, who was going to probably just cut me in two if I was anywhere near his wife. But once I met Marco, as farther from the truth, he just was the most gentle, just beautiful man you'd ever meet. And also he designed the cover for our book and did the book design as well, too, because he's a great graphic designer as well. So she picked me up from the airport, and then the adventure began. That night after the conference, about 9:30, the adventure began where everything changed.
Okay, so let's pause there and bring Patty in. So Patty, I have to say, I'm very proud of you for agreeing to step out and agree to do this book with Dave, because, that's a large part in the beginning of the book, was that you have had a lot of extraordinary, very spiritual experiences. I mean, things that you have gone through yourself and what you've done with other people. And there was a little bit of fear of actually kind of coming out of what I say, the spiritual closet, and really owning probably your power, your gifts, and all of these experiences, and, letting people really know, what's going on for you. So congratulations. Very proud of you. And I know that that's a big leap, So
you
Dave's
right into it. You keyed right into it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Dave kind of is bringing us up to this big moment where everything kind of happened with you. And these stories are just amazing. But let's bring you in a little bit and tell us what was going on with you before you had met Dave. And then you can bring us up to the same moment. And then we'll kind of start to begin how really it sounds like you were channeling Dave's daughter, and she was coming through you and providing him with messages that really, without a shadow of a doubt, I think really solidified for Dave that there is life after death. So,
for me, the journey's been lifelong. As a child in the 60s, I was born in 1961. So when I was a little child, my family, I was strange because my closest relationship was with, I called my secret friends. I was in a Catholic household, so of course Jesus would come into me, and he was my close friend. When there was drama in the house, there were things that went on in my childhood home. Everybody has their stories of drama, and the way that I dealt with the drama inside the home was to go outside at sunset after dinner, or I just remembered I was being after dinner, couldn't wait to eat dinner to go back out on the swing underneath a 100-year-old grapevine, at which time I would sit and converse with my secret friends. It was Jesus, it was the Blessed Mother, and then there would be these old Indian men in my visual place as I'm swinging and my eyes are closed, visualizing these Indian men who said to call them native elders. Now, I'm 6 or 7 in a Catholic household. There is no language of Native culture whatsoever in my home, even though the area that I lived in on the North Shore of Long Island, in a small community called Glen Cove, right by the beach, turns out it was the highest point in the area because of a water tower put across the street. We found out about its elevation. And when you study Native culture, in the time when the earth was natural, they would go to the highest point in the area to pray. My home was discovered as the highest point in that area of the cove. Then there were these 2 bald men that wore these long robes. When I went to the seminary and saw a picture of Buddhist monks, I realized those were my men. They were Buddhist monks. Right. So for me, it was an ongoing thing, but because of my family and their response to me that I was strange, I would rock in the corner of our couch for hours, just back and forth. And now you come into this where we are right now, and children that are on the spectrum are seen rocking because they go into their own place in their own world. So I can understand from from where we were in society, I remember once being referred to as mentally retarded. I laughed because I didn't understand it, because I was really happy and content in my world. And the response that, yes, well, this is my daughter, Patsy is what they called me, who's mentally retarded, because I was sitting there rocking in the corner, very content and not paying attention to what was going on in that outside world. And I explain that to you because of your background, to understand it was my reality. But
Right.
there was one time that my spirit guides that I refer to now, the terms and the labels that we use are spirit guides. It said to me, when I was referred to in that way, of course they think of you like that. You don't interact. And the Native American elders actually used a term to me and said, you can't keep doing that. They'll put you in a sanitarium. I'd never heard that word before and had no idea what it was. I just remember being so little that when I sat back on the couch, my feet didn't touch the floor. You just said, that's the only way I can gauge what age I was. And then I actually found out what a sanitarium was, and they told me, you don't want to go there. So you have to learn how to interact with the world outside.
Wow.
That's absolutely 100% total truth of how I experienced those years. So I know how to learn to interact with my athletic family, the person that was the horse person. How do you fit in each person's world?
Right.
The next experience for me was when I was 16. I had major ear problems all of my childhood. And at 16, it had gotten so bad that there was now blood flowing from my ear. Part of it because I didn't always tell my mom when I had ear problems, because it only meant more drama. So I held it back. That after that surgery, I had an experience that they now term a near-death, NDE, near-death experience. To me, it was real, what had happened to me. I started choking in the hospital bed after coming out of the anesthesia. My mother was standing above me, and an old boyfriend was standing at the foot of the bed. And as I was choking, my mother got very, screaming, theatrical. I then was outside of my body. I could see and comprehend what was happening in the room. I could tell you moment by moment what my mother was doing, how she ran by the boyfriend, pushed him against the wall, watched her go through the doorway. Meanwhile, comprehending at the same point, there was a beautiful woman that was there in the light. And I could see her in this beautiful flowing gown. Remember, I was Catholic. I referred to her immediately, Mary. Besides, I was always a child that was always saying the rosary underneath my pillow. I can't tell you how many rosaries I broke because I would sleep and break them. I would always need a new rosary. So I logically looked at it. Why Mary shows up for me? Well, I had a strong connection and a trust in her because of all the dramas around me. You see the logic that I can now, in hindsight, recognize. So after the experience, talked about it only with the boyfriend, wouldn't dare tell my mom. And the boyfriend said, that's exactly what happened. How did you know that? You were unconscious. And then he made fun of me. So I never talked about it until I met my husband. That happened in 1977. It was December 19th, 1977 that I had that experience. And I met my husband in 1981. I didn't talk about it until I found that trust with him again. In fact, I hid it, got into the real world, job, life, boyfriends, dates, bad dates, good dates. With my husband, he started to see how my intuition would come in, but I still wanted to be a mom and I wanted to be a wife. So that role became my identity. that I started to learn to trust my intuition. And I always seem to find mentors in my life. I call my first mentor my fairy godmother. She was a wonderful mentor. Then there was another man that came in. There were always people that showed up that always seemed to say the right thing to help empower me to own it.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward 1990s, met a group of people that we started doing prayer groups together, and the person that was leading it said, I would suggest that you all consider going to a seminary to understand the bigger connection to a universal creator. And for me, I just like the idea of thinking, I always wondered, I saw Mary, but what if somebody's Buddhist? What if somebody's Native American? This beautiful woman is not going to be the Blessed Mother. They will come in something, but how do they feel? How do they deal with challenges? How do they deal with traumas? How do they see it? So I went to the seminary only to fulfill curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
not to understand. But now I go to the seminary and you start learning the spiritual practices of other faiths. And every time another spiritual practice was introduced to me, it took me to another level of awareness, a new understanding of the human existence, of being human within a greater perspective of the universe, to a divine source. The founder is the one that I quote all the time. It's Rabbi Joseph Kelberman. His history, what he endured in his life. And at 85, when I was in the seminary in 96 to 98, his perspective, he lost his entire family in the Holocaust. His father, Jewish Orthodox, his entire DNA family, brothers, wife, 2 children, he was sent over first. And then all of his family disappeared. Getting through that kind of devastation, and why me? And he's a rabbi. And he said his vision was that everybody walks, there was a beautiful sun, a light, the divine source of love that everybody was heading toward, and they were all holding hands. So that's the interfaith part of it. So it's not instead of, it's in addition to. So coming out of seminary, my daughter goes to school, my husband goes to work. I didn't turn on television. I went and sat in meditation. And I started to utilize the practices and started taking Reiki to understand how the energy flows through. I dove into everything that the universe brought to me. So now what do you do with it? Well, I don't want to be an entertainer. I don't want to go under a term of psychic, medium. I want to continue to see what they can teach me. And what can I do to help other people without them knowing? I got to zip in and zip out. That was my existence. I used to call it putting a cloak over so nobody could see who I was, but I would just let spirit guide me as to what they needed. So the whole experience, I ended up at the Angel of Hope statue on Long Island through a series of synchronistic events, including the loss of 2 young men who were friends to our family. The first one passed away or crossed December 13th. 2005. He was a young man with no arms and his legs were differently formed. And my daughter and I, puppy raised his service dog. He got a service dog that we started out puppy raising. It was his dog. 2 days before his unexpected passing from an aneurysm, we had in New York City with him at the body exhibition, South Street Freeport, no lightly falling. Sitting there talking, looking at the veins and muscles in a body. And he had no arms. These kinds of things, and you look at it and you look back and you see the synchronistic events. His passing was the first one that I was able to create and empower myself with a full relationship with him on the other side of the veil. He would say things to me and I would go to see his family. And what he said to me comes up in conversation. A memory that was imparted in my head during meditation. I walk into the house and they're discussing it. he was validating and empowering me to understand, hey, I'm really doing it. This is outside of it. That's why when the conference came up and the Angel of Hope came up, I wanted to understand academically, what are they teaching? What are they saying? And how am I presenting it from this perspective? Bringing in psychology with spirituality. I wanted to know more.
Right.
And as you heard, like, everything blacked out. So it was really his daughter. I knew his daughter was with me. My memory of how things happen a little bit different than what Dave's is because of my perspective.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's how we see it, is integrating the two.
Yeah. So Dave, can you kind of bring us back to, so we have, Patty's background and all of the stuff that she was experiencing. I love how there's like these two lives, right? The two of you are living your lives in totally different ways. And then bam, this conference brings you guys together. And then now you're on a road trip, you're staying at her house with her and her husband. And then all of a sudden this major experience of your daughter beginning to come through her, happens, which is also part of the inspiration for this book. So why don't you bring us to that night?
Before we get to actually Long Island, I got to go back to the rainbow that Patty and Marco saw in September. It was on Route 17. They were coming home from a mini vacation. Route 17, Pat and I talked about this. If you had 1 and 7, you get 8, and that's the infinity symbol. If you invert the 8, you get infinity, which is eternity, power and eternal life. She had said to me, and I don't know if it was at the conference, but it was at another time, she had said she had heard a voice in her head saying that I need you to talk to my father. And she was convinced that it was Jeannine getting through to her to say, I want you to talk to my father. So we get to, it was about 9:30 at night. She had a fire going in the living room. It was November. It was very unseasonal. Well, it was like 70 degrees. I think that whole weekend was beautiful. I think it was mid-60s, 70-degree weather. So we're sitting, and she's asking me questions about Jeannine and asking me questions about my background. And then she announces that Jeannine is present with us and she would like to talk with you. Now, for somebody who is firmly grounded in science, and I had rejected all things spiritual, it was almost like I had a fear of embracing spirituality for a variety of different reasons. But when she told me that my daughter wanted to talk to me, I knew immediately that what was transpiring was true. And the reason that I knew it was true is because in September on that trip to Old Forge, I'd asked for that. I said, I want to be where they are. I wanted a new sense of awareness, some other perspectives that would help me embrace a peaceful perspective on my daughter's transition. And so that entire weekend, Jeannine was passing on messages. And one of the biggest messages was, she said, you're doing a great job honoring me, but you have a family, you have your wife, my mother, my brothers. You need to embrace other categories in your life. You're doing a great job honoring me, but you need to embrace the totality of who you are. That was the message. And I heard that loud and clear. But the thing that was amazing to me, and we mentioned this in the book, is that there were times where I was actually literally talking to Jeannine. Now, Patty would sit cross-legged. She had this youthful energy about her. And she would sit cross-legged and talking with me, much like my daughter would. Her mannerisms at certain times during the weekend, her facial expressions, I thought I was actually talking to my daughter. There was one part that we mentioned in the book where, Patty said, make yourself at home the next morning when you get up, make yourself breakfast. So I was going to do some oatmeal, and I was really, really careful about trying not to make a mess. Because that's been the influence of just being mindful of not making messes that, my wife needed to clean up after me. And so Patty just got impatient with me, and I saw this frown come on over her face, and she, give me that. And then she immediately, and I looked and I said, Jeannine, is that you? Just like, it was literal. Okay, that's how realistic this was.
Wow.
And it was just like that, literally for the entire weekend. Now, the night before, there had been so much energy. She had a fire going, and I was shivering, literally shivering. And Pat and I talked about it. She explained that spirit energy going through me. There was so much that I was trying to process at light speed that my body just started shivering uncontrollably. So she had to cover me with 2 blankets at 3:00 in the morning until I went to sleep. And also, at that point, I think I had been in such an altered state that I actually saw a shadow of a woman, just with their arms outstretched in a gesture of love. Okay, so and the other thing, I got to go back to beyond words again, if this is okay. And this is something that I hadn't mentioned. But the morning after I took the last presenter, and I think I might have been Carla Blowy, the last presenter, to the airport, came home. I was literally exhausted. So I probably slept for about an hour and a half. And I had a dream about a faceless young brunette, okay, long hair. And she was hugging me from behind. And I'm getting chills just talking about this. She was hugging me from behind. And I could actually, April, feel her touch as I was going back into bed. It was like she was laying me back in the bed. That's how realistic of a dream this was. I immediately felt that was my daughter, Jeannine. And I thought, she was just, very proud of the job that I did. And this was before I went to see Patty, before I went to stay with Patty. I thought she was just proud of the job I did at the conference, and she was validating, great job, Dad. So I think it was the Sunday night. There was a song that Patty felt moved to play called Testify to Love, and I think it was by Winona Judd. Am I correct? Winona Judd. And Patty started singing it aloud. And then after she got done singing it, she hugged me from behind in a very identical manner to the faceless brunette in that dream. I never told Pat about that dream. And then she goes, I love you very much. And I said, thank you, Patty. And she goes, it's Jeannine, you jerk. And I knew it was my daughter because that's how Jeannine we would interact in life.
Right.
But it was the exact hug that I experienced in that dream. And I never told Pat about that dream. Mm-hmm. So that dream was further validation of what I had asked for. And Jeannine was telling me, we're going to go on a great adventure together. And that adventure has continued for 10 years and counting.
Yeah. Well, and, the interesting thing is we kind of bridge psychology and spirituality into this conversation. Here you are, a psychology professor. You've studied, psychology for your whole career here, and you were always more science-based. And then you meet Patty and you're having this experience, over the whole weekend of these, mannerisms, the way that you and Jeannine would kid each other. It's like, it's coming out through Patty. And, you're kind of convinced here that, and have this knowing inside that your daughter is truly present, giving these messages. Now, from the psychology standpoint, how were you also able to assess Patty to know that she wasn't having any psychotic break? She wasn't, displaying any forms of schizophrenia, of hearing a voice in her head and claiming that it was your daughter. And you guys give another example of this too, of when Patty had an experience basically of a Native American male that had walked in, and her husband saw her face totally changed. And, it wasn't that she was hallucinating or having some sort of psychotic break, but there was this true experience that happened. You guys cover that in the book as well. So maybe we can also talk about, how you were able to begin to blend spirituality and psychology, and seeing them really supporting each other, and realizing that people like Patty who have these abilities and these gifts really aren't mentally ill.
Well, the one thing that I could attest to with everything in the years since, she has channeled the wisdoms of many wise spirits. It's just not my daughter. It could have been Buddha, it could have been Gandhi, it could have been anybody. but she was channeling wisdoms from highly evolved spirits. But in that sense, she was always very grounded. She was very rational. She was very centered. This was just a part of the way that she related to the world, so in a very multidimensional way. I have students that I teach that have very similar abilities, but are afraid to embrace it because they're trying to find the balance between just being a normal young adult, trying to make their way in the world, to this is how I see the world. Is anybody going to think I'm out of sorts or I'm abnormal because of this? But Patty was always very grounded. She was very, she was very centered, and there was never any history of mental illness that would, or schizophrenia that would account for that. And again, I had the reality of the experience in November as my basis. So when she began to channel on a Native American and African American spirit, and she told me about this, I took it to be totally true because of the experience that I had. It was different, but yet very similar to what I had experienced.
Yeah.
And so I knew then that this was a woman who was versed in spiritual practices in a variety of different aspects, and also saw the world multidimensionally. I always tell Pat she sees Pat, present, and future simultaneously, and she can see that. And that's the way she relates to the world. I think it's great. And because of her, because of that influence, I have other individuals in my support circle who are very intuitive, who have versed in different spiritual practices, as well as those who are grounded in science. So I have a very interesting circle of friends, and that is because of the influence of Pat, who also said, have more than one teacher. You just don't need me to be your only teacher. You have several. And so, so I've taken those teachings to heart. So.
Yeah. So Patty, can you explain on your end what it's like for you and maybe the process that you go through when someone who is crossed on the other side begins to speak through you? We're kind of hearing it from Dave's perspective of he's witnessing this and really feeling like he is sitting, with his child. And what is it like for you to kind of have, as I don't know if you would call yourself a channeler, again, it's like we put these things in boxes now, but yeah, to have her spirit and her soul come in, what is it like for you to experience that?
Okay. For me, this was why it took so long for me to come out, because to me, after the seminary, I was learning how to communicate on different levels of consciousness to the point where I feel spirits enter me. I can feel a shift in me. If I'm sitting there and there are thoughts in my head, and this was a process of evolution. Remember, I was ordained in 98. That was 2010 when I was meeting, interacting with Dave and connecting with Dave and his daughter. Things pop into my mind that wouldn't be my normal process. My normal process is, okay, what am I making for dinner? What errands do I have to run? Oh, does the car oil have to get changed? Do I have to do the bills? Oh, what's happening with my girlfriend here? That would be my reality. But when you're driving in a car with your husband and a huge rainbow on a day where there is no moisture in the air, goes over Route 17 from one side to the other, and you can actually go, we have the photographs, we have videos of that, because my husband was like, this is crazy. There's no logical scientific way for this to be up there. And I'm in my head sitting there. So we're in this incredible moment. And in my head, I hear, I need you to speak to my father. And in our conversation, and the way that I remember that day on August 25th, the first thing I always ask people when they tell me they've lost someone, I'm sorry, that they've crossed, but do you see signs from them? Mm-hmm. That's my first question. Do you see signs? I've had people say, well, I don't know. the different responses. In Dave's case, he says, yeah, well, I don't really believe in that stuff, Pat.
Right.
But I mean, that's exactly, I don't really believe in that stuff, Pat. But there was one Father's Day that my wife and I both feel that Jeannine sent me this double rainbow on Father's Day. Okay. They felt something. And I said, that's exactly it, because that's the spiritual essence. When people start to understand their intuition, you, Dave, and that's what Dave learned to do, is to trust that inner knowing. One of the teachings that I learned along the way is your first thought is what spirit runs through you. Then you tend to mind it to death and think about it and try to process it and make sense of it. But that first thought, for me, I started to, I owned that intuition and would say the things that needed to say. And when you start to do that, there were books out there. Okay. One person said to me, oh, you do soul retrieval. Another person said, oh, you're a medium. No, I'm a minister. A minister, a true minister, is there to minister people and meet them where they are. From the perspective that I see the world in. So for me, it's meeting people where they are and then letting the wisest spirit use me as a voice. I don't want to be, I never wanted to be somebody that was a medium. I wanted to help empower people to make their own connection to the divine source. And once you do that, your loved ones will start communicating with you. You will see them. And every person has that ability. I just dove in full time and wanted to understand it on a vast level, which is unique for that time period.
Yeah. Yeah. And the book is just so much fun. I mean, I wish we had more time to go in and give more examples, but there's just so many great stories between the two of you. And also, just stories that you've shared, Patty, in the book, kind of like through Dave's telling of it, that really is amazing. So I would really highly recommend people who are really interested in this whole topic of bridging spirituality and psychology together. This is definitely a book for you guys. But there is one last thing, as we're running kind of out of time here, I just want to check my notes that I always love to try to give our listeners and the people who are watching a little tip. And there was just this great point in the book. I don't know, Dave, if we talked about it in the last one, but you were talking about the pieces of me exercise. Yep. And it's a great way. And this was also kind of a way that where you were able to bring Jeannine into your world and keep her spirit alive. But also, like you said, she was giving you the message of like, thanks, Dad, for honoring me, doing a good job, but you got a whole nother life over here that you have to tend to. And kind of bringing this in. So I'd kind of like to leave our listeners with these 3 questions that you usually teach people how to do to keep the spirit of their either child or their deceased loved one, whatever the relationship is, just continuing to be alive through them. So can you give them that exercise?
Yep. And basically, Pieces of Me is about integrating the best qualities of our loved ones into ourselves, where essentially what we do is our loved ones, their essence, their pure essence, which is pure spirit, their pure love, their pure is integrated within our own being. And we kind of, I tell my students, particularly in death, dying, and bereavement class, where they do know my history, that Jeannine and I are kind of a package deal, that we are doing this together. And a lot of times I feel, I have a lot of young energy running through me during those classes, and I think it's Jeannine's influence. But it's essentially asking yourself, what qualities of your positive qualities of your loved ones do you see as, do you see them as being creative? Do you see them as being caring? Do you see them as being compassionate? And essentially, how can you integrate those qualities into your own being so that it can help you move through grief? And I'm paraphrasing this, move through grief, and embrace a peaceful perspective after loss. And the third thing, how can you integrate those qualities in a way where you can live a life of purpose and be of service to each other? What I like about the exercise, what I like about this is that, particularly in the cases of ambivalent loss or stigmatized loss, where there's loss due to addiction or suicide, what I encourage individuals, whether they've lost a child, have lost a sibling, have lost a parent, concentrate on those positive qualities. Don't concentrate on cause of death. Don't concentrate on the behavior that contributed to their challenges in real life. Look at their pure positive qualities and ask yourself, how can you make them a part of you so that they can continue to live on within you, and so that you can and together you can move forward to help individuals find their greater purpose in life. And again, it's that it kind of embodies pure spirit. It embodies that whole concept of what we see in whatever we've read about in the afterlife, and individuals who have experienced near-death experience where they experience pure love and light. So this is kind of an exercise to kind of help an individual create their own heaven on earth, while at the same time moving through grief and honoring the special qualities of their loved ones.
Lovely. I love it. Well, thank you both so much for being guests on the show today. And where can people find your book if they would like to read it? And let's let them know how they can also get a hold of both of you.
Okay. You want me to take that one, Pat, or you want to take it? Okay. Yeah. All right. I just want to, they can get a hold of us through email at psychologyprofessorandminister@gmail.com. We have a dedicated website to the book, which is psychologyprofessorandminister.com. And also they can find the book on Amazon. They can just type in "When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister," and it'll take them right to that. And they can also read the reviews and ratings that we've gotten so far, which have been very, very positive. And for that, Pat and I are both humbled and grateful for that. And also, in our website, we have a section about the book, and we have a hyperlink to Amazon there. So there's a variety of different ways to get in touch with us, to contact us, and to purchase the book.
Wonderful. Well, lots of luck to you guys in selling that book. And thank you so much for bringing, both perspectives on here, Dave. It's wonderful to have you back as a guest. Like I said, once you write more, come back, come on.
All right.
Yeah.
We will. And it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure being with you for a second time too, April. I enjoyed it.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you, Patty. So nice to meet you and having you on the podcast as a first-time guest.
Thank you very much. Your perspective is incredible, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
All right.
Namaste.
Yes, same here.
Yeah, namaste.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Check out their website, purchase the book, and I will talk to you guys next time. Take care, everyone.